Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kellum-Pathe. I am the Product Communications Specialist for Leica Camera USA. Thank you so much for joining us for another Leica Conversations. Before I introduce our guests, a little bit of housekeeping. You will see that there is a chat function, right next to the window. We would love to hear where you're tuning in from. This is also a great space for you to input your questions throughout the program. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Brandon Ruffin, photographer and director. Brandon, so good to see you. How you doing?
Hey, Nathan, what's going on, man?
Thank you so much for joining us. This is quite an exciting day. It's launch day. How are you feeling?
Good. It took a journey to get here, and it's exciting. It's extremely excited, feeling good.
Well, before we show your images and go through them, I would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself to the audience. Please feel free to share a little bit about your journey and how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Brandon Ruffin. I create work, film work, and photography work under the moniker Ruff Draft. But my given name by my mother and father is Brandon Ruffin. And yeah, I'm Bay Area born and raised. I was born in San Francisco on the Presidio back when it was an active military base. And once my father got out of the military, my family moved to the city of Richmond in the East Bay, not too far from San Francisco, and you know had been an artist the whole time there. So taking in the artistic spirit of the Bay Area. I think like many kids from my generation, and ran with it. For as far as
Fantastic.
now, as far as now, currently work at Google as in doing research and development for image processing products. Mainly, we work with the Pixel and sort of bridging the gap between traditional photography and what is now capable with mobile photography with machine learning and AI.
Amazing. I think we're going to dive into that topic with this camera since the M11-D does have content credentials and authentication of the imagery. But before we get into that, let's look at some of your shots, starting with this one, which is a personal favorite of mine that you've shared with us so far. Could you share a little bit more about this particular project? How did it come about? How did you choose this particular subject? Please feel free to share a little more about this.
Yeah, so this project was an interesting one. When I was first informed about the M11-D and that I'd be representing the best of what this thing could do, it was an undertaking, and I immediately just went to the drawing board to figure out, what were the things that were strong about the M11-D or any digital camera that didn't have a screen? Like, what were the strong points? I think for a lot of people, sort of minimizing a camera to the sense of not having a screen would feel like maybe a weak point or something that would limit them. But for me, I sort of leaned in on this idea that this was a beautiful sort of marriage between the things I love about film photography and the things I love about digital photography. But once you make that connection to the film photography world, there's a certain sense of timelessness that comes about. There's a sense of photos that are iconic that come to your mind. And so immediately, when we started to develop this project, I called a good friend of mine, the producer on this project, Xavier Cunningham, and basically said, "Hey, this is what Leica just had hit me up about. What do you think?" And these are my ideas. And so the gentleman you see here is Dale Johnson, very, very talented polo player here, friend of mine as well. And so I think there was this connection to polo where that was another sport that felt sort of timeless, and the imagery I could imagine from polo, everything seemed to connect in my mind. And so I needed to start to articulate, how this was going to fuse into a story that allowed the camera to do what it did best. So Xavier and I talked for a bit. The original plan was a little more complicated, I think, than what it needed to be, which is where we had this idea to shoot three different stories that sort of leaned in on this deep connection to timelessness and this deep connection to archiving and a through line to things from the old world that were really crafted with the idea of quality and longevity with the new world that we walk through today, where technology is advancing quickly and our capabilities as storytellers and as image makers has been greatly democratized. and where do those two things meet? And so here we've arrived at the story with Dale, the equestrian, and it was a really, I think, a beautiful marriage of all the things that we were looking for.
And were you familiar with this sport before talking to Dale about this project, or did you learn more about his craft while you were on the project with him?
I 100% learned more about it while we were on the project. I mean, I knew what polo was, but I think one of the things that attracted me to the story was that I've never known a polo player, right, in person, and Dale was the only one. And it's such an old sport as well, and one that's touched many places on the globe. But it was one that still felt very rare, and it wasn't a story that I was too familiar with. And I think in today's age, where information is so available, literally at your fingertips, as a storyteller, if you can find something that feels that is unique to you, and maybe something that you can learn from as you're going through and trying to tell this story, I think there's an impact there that is what we should be looking for, as far as
Mm.
that we want to take on, the projects that we want to bring to light. So that aspect of watching not just Dale play a polo match, but the relationship that he has with his horses, and the way in which they train, and this like intimacy that's had between them, and these all the things that literally have to go unspoken, because you're dealing with these very intelligent animals, and you're dealing with all the emotions that come with, anybody who's been around horses. No, I mean, there's a lot of emotions that are there. They're very sensitive animals. They're very intuitive animals. And so there was just something really beautiful about the unspokenness that relationship, and watching it play out. And so I learned a ton about polo, as we were doing this. And he's a craftsman. So he was very patient with the crew and with us. And we were able to navigate around the horses safely, and as well as keeping them, not disrupting their peace as well, which is important. But I think in the end of it, we were able to capture like some really, really beautiful images, and again, tell this story in a way that felt very authentic.
Have you worked with animals before? I love what you said about the sensitivity that horses have in general. And, kind of a follow-up to question to that would be, was it more kind of, on the fly, the way that you were composing your images, or do you feel that there was perhaps some structure before you got to the site and you knew you wanted to shoot? But I guess with animals, it's kind of like whatever is going on is what you got. There's nothing you can do about that. How was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, in a normal film set, you would want to have as much control over the things you can control. But yeah, animals are an entirely different element to that. And so um, we we set out with a goal in mind. And I think ultimately, when we went into shooting, I knew what I wanted it to feel like. And so I think my job in directing this was to articulate, one, what I wanted it to feel like, but also to, there's mood boards and creative decks that are created around this, so that everybody gets to have a bit of a tangible visual relationship with what that feeling should look like. And we had it wasn't just filming, right? We also were creating the stills for this project at the same time, which sounds like it goes very naturally, but it's at times still photography and moving photography and the actual art of making a film, they don't always go hand in hand. And so there's sometimes
Hmm.
so I think that was another thing that we wanted to tackle, was how can we create a plan for this to merge together in a way that those two competing mediums weren't necessarily clashing.
Hmm. Yep, totally understand. And I know that you shoot with film cameras as well. When you first got the M11-D, would you trying to look at the back of the screen, there was nothing there, or did you immediately put yourself in a position of like, this is exactly like my M3 and there's nothing to look at, so I'm just going to keep shooting? How was that for you?
It was interesting. Obviously, for the sake of the interview, it's a good question. I called you immediately. I'm like, man, I keep looking at the back of the screen, because muscle memory is a real thing, and the ways in which we navigate things with like our that are more tactile, right? Like that is a thing, and so the way a thing feels, the way it weighs, the way the textures move across it, your brain is already starting to move through like what it thinks it is, what it knows it to be. And outside of the screen, this camera was identical to my M11, right? And so that was something to get over, is that I didn't, couldn't look at the screen. So now once my mind moves from that and I accept that I don't have a screen and I'm navigating the camera in a way that I would with a film camera, now the other problem is there's no film advance lever, right? For me to then,
Right.
like, the feeling of the film moving through the camera is not right. So I'm doing, my hands want to do these things that are intuitive to what the nature of the camera was, or what the nature of the camera is. And there was definitely a period of time, and it was just, it took maybe a few hours on set, but just a few days actually of handling the camera to sort of alleviate that. But immediately,
Hmm.
absolutely, when I first started shooting with it, it went from, all right, there's no screen, stop looking at the screen. And as I started treating it as a film camera, all right, well, you're not moving the film through, so it's not going to, there's just these little things that are
Yep.
feedback loops to what you do next. And it didn't take long, but and there was definitely some little hiccups in the beginning.
Do you like the aspect of photography in which you take pictures with the film camera and then there's a waiting period before you get to see those images developed? In this case, with the M11-D, you have to wait until you add those images to a computer or to a mobile device. That waiting period, how important is it to you in the way that you do photography?
The waiting period is its own experience. Like, there are times where, for the nature of what I'm shooting, I need it's good to have the immediate feedback. But I do greatly enjoy that waiting, right? And so if I don't, for whatever professional reason, need to be able to actively check what's happening on the camera, there's sort of this alleviation from that. And you also feel there's an alleviation of the feeling to be so perfect, and that knowing that every shot doesn't need to be perfect. I mean, that's the beauty to me in film, right? There are so many
Yeah.
images on my M3 or M6 or my Pentax 6.7 that I've taken that are far from technically perfect, but there's an emotion to them that feels really impactful and powerful. And so the waiting period is part of that, because
Hmm.
you have to surrender to the medium, which is, the medium is about feeling and about intuition and about capturing moments that exist in literally fractions of a second. I was
Hmm.
talking to my father on the phone today, and as he was looking at the images, he said these images exist and then they don't exist, like, just that quick. And I think that's the beauty of photography, and the way in which
Hmm.
it represents the world, or at least the way someone's seeing the world, in a way that almost no other medium can do. And so, yes, I mean, I liked that experience of being able to take this camera, shoot, and divorce myself from the need of the technical perfection that comes with when you can look at a picture and you just go, okay, I'll just take it again. And
Right.
it's the hyper focus as well. When the stakes are high,
Yeah.
you're less willing to, sort of let the shutter just do what it does, right? Like, you're really trying to dial in exposure. Digital is obviously more forgiving, right? And especially with sensors like the ones we have now, it's much more forgiving. Dynamic range is brilliant. We live in a very fortunate time. Um, and so you can still kind of move through it maybe a little bit faster than you would with a film camera, but
Hmm.
that feeling is definitely still there. I remember, shooting with this thing in New York, and I couldn't wait to, like, get the opportunity to download them. I didn't have I couldn't get it to my phone at that exact moment, right? And so I had to wait until the day was over and I could hook everything up and transfer the files over and look at them. And that was an experience, and I loved it. And it is very reminiscent of the process I go through when I'm, you know, waiting for my film rolls to come back to me.
Yeah. I think that there's something interesting about, like you said, the waiting period, but also the balance between the experience of the camera and also the ability and the power that the sensor provides. Because you mentioned about something about, not being quite perfect, and I totally agree with that. But at the same time, you have a tremendous amount of power in post-production to frame it or reframe it with 60 megapixels, for example, the dynamic range that you mentioned. And I feel like that is a really interesting balance in today's world. Of course, you can be a little more purist and going with, directly with film, You could definitely go the opposite and go directly with digital. But with this camera, you have that beautiful balance. And I think that in the world of creativity, in the world of emotion, having a tool that puts you in a certain emotional state helps you craft better images, in my opinion. Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those images are sort of a reflection of the mental space that we're in at the time we're taking them. And so um, that process yielded, for me, that process yielded a higher amount of keepable photos, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I find that with film as well, although I think with when I'm shooting film, uh, what I decide as a keepable photo is it can be different than when I'm shooting digital. You know, film is
Sure.
alive, and so there are things that will get and appreciate and enjoy, like sort of the randomness of what the actual living process of the film that is different than my bar for digital. But in saying that, yes, like my yield for good shots with this camera was much higher because I
Hmm.
was in a headspace where I wanted to be, more dialed in. And you can argue that you should be like that all the time, but I enjoy photography. I don't mind pressing the shutter down, right? Like I love photography. So
Yeah.
appreciate this camera really did dial that process in.
We have some questions already from the chat here. A question, you said that the camera helps you slow down. How do you feel that this helped you in your storytelling?
The way that slowing down with the camera helps in the storytelling is it allows you to actually spend some time with what's happening with yourself emotionally. I mean,
Mm,
that's a huge aspect of it. Any art void of emotion, I don't think you can call art, and
mm,
so there's a lot of things that human beings, since we were drawing in caves, have been trying to accomplish with capturing the world around us through different mediums. And I think that to a great extent is working through emotion, asking questions, and trying to find answers, within ourselves through the process of creating art. And so for me, I think that slowing down process is really huge because it does allow you that time to spend with yourself, to work through your process, and also to be selective. Right, when you slow
mm.
down, you can look for scenes in a little bit of a different way than you do when you're sort of just speeding through it. And I think that can be really, really important. For me personally, I have a really go, go, go sort of attitude and personality. And photography is as much of a practical and professional thing. It's a spiritual thing for me as well. It's meditative. It allows me to capture the world around me and articulate that world visually in the ways in which some people might write things down. For me, I have my camera with me every day. I have a camera with me all the time. And
Hmm.
for me, it's the way that I can remember things in a certain way, really acutely. So again, like I've never been that into journaling. I've tried to journal, but for me, the camera sort of serves that purpose, and I can look back at
Yeah.
that I took 15 years ago and be transported back, or remember things, little details I hadn't, or really remember the entire situation that had unfolded that led to that picture and led to
Hmm.
led to that photograph being captured, being made. So for me, that slowdown process is it has to be attached to photography, or it becomes just another thing we do.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, just the phrase of a picture is a thousand words, and documenting your life, witnessing what's around you. But what you just said really resonates with me with when you see an image from 15 years ago, I understand and I remember my emotional situation at that time, how I was feeling emotionally when I was taking that picture. And I don't know if I could translate that into words. That would be very hard for me to do, but there's a feeling I get when I see a shot that I've taken a long time ago and I'm immediately put back into that situation. So that's the power of photography. I mean, that's there's nothing else to say about that. That's just why people love it and why we love it. And speaking
Absolutely.
about photography, let's get back into your work here. I have another shot that I love. This time going into the details of the environment that you're in. A lot of the shots that you present are, documenting the relationship of Dale and the horse. But here we have a shot of detail of color. What grabbed you with this particular moment and this particular shot?
I think when I was looking at it, the light was coming across the hat, and Dale had reached for it, and the colors really sort of stood out against what was happening more desaturated. If you look, there's like these colors that just really come out of nowhere at you, and there's a lot
Mm,
of texture, there's a lot of detail, and there's deep sentiment in it. This hat actually belongs to Dale's father, Dale Senior, and
mm,
this is this experience is something that they share together, and their story in regards to horses and training horses and working with horses goes back generations and generations. And
mm.
so this particular image for me, outside of everything that was happening aesthetically, from the sense of what was happening emotionally and what is happening on the undercurrent, is this connection to passing things on and passing on this legacy, passing on this tradition, a connection to your ancestors and everything that they've done to get you to this point. And when I saw that, for me, that's what stood out, and I wanted to make sure to capture that moment. It was about the details, and also hands. So much of what people's lives are stored in their hands. It's just
Mm.
it's passed on to us genetically. The way our hands are shaped, and the way our fingernails and everything about our hands, right? Like has this connection to our family lineage. And then we wear in our own story into that. We carve in our own uniqueness into that with our scars, with the calluses, the way the hands, right? Everything about what a hand looks like over time reflects on a person's story. And so to me, there was just a deep connection and symbolism in that moment that I wanted to capture.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of somebody's identity, really. It's a way to identify people, and the fact that Dale is grabbing the hat. There's action there. There's a desire there. I think that's incredibly powerful. I have some more questions from the chat here from Lewis Ruffman. Does the project dictate the choice of camera, or does the camera dictate the project? So when would you specifically use an M11-D over a Leica M11?
Yeah, I think that both of those things can actually be true. You can have one camera in your hand and decide you want to take on a project that is in tune with what that camera's sort of strong points are. You can also have a project and know which camera you want to pick up. Right, the M11D is not something that I would personally go out and necessarily do a standard fashion shoot with, or if I was going out to take photos of like headshots or things like that people needed for a professional capacity that were maybe a little bit more standard, or that I needed to sort of check in on the photos to make sure that we had what we had. It wouldn't be my go-to. But for something like this, it falls into a beautiful space. This was a self-assigned project, right? I mean, it was
Mm.
initiated with this inquiry if I wanted to be interested in doing something for the M11D, but then we crafted a project and it was self-assigned. And I think it's a really great thing for photographers, really any artist to do. I'm trying to encourage my 11-year-old to do this, is like find things that you enjoy, find things that you notice in the world, come up with an idea and create a project, or create an artistic project around it, so that your art is not so fractured into all these different spaces all the time, that you're able to create cohesive ideas visually, in regards to myself and in regards to my daughter. But also, if you're a writer, you do poetry. I mean, there's all you do music. There's all types of ways to create a cohesiveness to the art that you're creating. And so I think that you know I always describe the idea, right? Like that the saying is, "Don't fall in love with a hammer." And this is true, right? You don't have to have the M11D to take amazing photos. You don't have to have a traditional camera to take amazing photos. The work that I do with Google, I'm on a team with like just the most amazing people on the planet when it comes to ideas and executing them through technology. We are trying to make it so that everybody has the ability, if they at least have a smartphone in their pocket, that they have the ability to take an amazing photo and capture their world, have a voice, which is extremely important today as it is any other day. It's extremely important. And so many communities have been left without being able to craft their own narratives, right? They've been to other people telling the stories, rather it be a lack of access, in all types of ways in which lack of access exists. But you don't have to have this camera to do that, or any camera. You can go out and take photos because you're compelled to take photos, and your mind and your soul is the spirit of a photographer. Me, if I have my M11 and my M11-D, the M11-D is great for a project like this because I get to determine, the scope of it. I get to determine what photos are going to like make it as the final and which ones aren't. I'm the one surfacing the entire emotional and artistic scale of what this is going to be. And so in that, it's great to grab a camera like this because now you're going to get all types of things you never thought of. Your brain is going to go to other places. Like once you surrender one aspect of it, which is I don't have my screen, so I'm not going to be able to see everything I'm doing. You get to embrace all the, like now you get to shut that part of your brain off, which is great. And now you embrace all the artistic things that can take place. You get to think, you get to build this emotional connection with the scene, and you see all this other stuff, right? The brain is like a sponge. It's only going to take in so much at one time. It's a computer in the sense, right? We're building computers to work like our brains do. So it is a computer. And so it can't handle all the tasks you want to do at once. So when you shut off one task, you're now opening up those resources for your mind to handle so many others. And for me, that was my experience with this, is that I was able to focus in on a lot of other things that I felt were much more creative, by shutting my mind down to thinking I need to check every single image, or every 20 image, or even every 100. Taking that off the table changed my relationship with the project and the environment I was shooting in.
Let's see some more shots. And you were talking about a little bit about your work, and I wanted to transition the topic to the content credentials in the camera. So content credentials is a way to authenticate images and the provenance of those images from this camera directly, based on hardware that is inside the camera. And as you document this story about Dale, as well as your work at Google, what are your thoughts on this idea of authentication and in the world of AI that we live in today?
I think it's refreshing to see that so many people are thinking about that and interested in that. With technology, human beings have a habit of just running with it, and that is beneficial when building. But we also should be thinking about safeguards, right? Like how do we protect the things that we value as a society, and where do we meet in the middle on that, right? Everybody's not going to agree on one thing at one time, but where do we meet in the middle? And also, as all this technology is coming into to be, we should be thinking about how do we protect provenance? Like how do we see something came from? How do we distinguish the truth from untruths, right? That is an important conversation to be had in the world right now. And the camera is an interesting medium. Photography is an interesting medium. The camera is an interesting tool because it can capture the truth, right? But it also captures what we want it to capture. It tells a story that's the part of the art form. And so you get into these philosophical questions about what's real and what's not real. If you take an image and you crop it and you take out a bit of information that was cropped, well, it's still reality, but is it the full story? And about how powerful context is, right? What we snap in 1 second, you take that photo 2 seconds later as a dynamic scene is happening, and perhaps you have a completely two different realities, right?
Right.
We do live in a day and age where there are so many things happening, and a lot of credible photojournalists all over the world are capturing all of the things that are happening all over the world. It's important to at least be thinking about in a time where an image can be created with a prompt, with a well prompted inquiry to a AI system, or into a model. Like, how do we determine what's real and what's fake? And even the questions of that become that's a whole nother conversation of real and fake. But it's great to have people thinking about it from the standpoint of how do we protect artists? How do we protect photographers? How do we protect this idea that we should at least know where something's been once we get to look at it?
Hmm.
Because where it stopped from the point that it was created versus the time you get to it, all those stops become very important. We are in a time right now where it's nearly, you can create images that are nearly indistinguishable, especially at first glance from a image taken with a camera, and that's only going to get better.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
think it's, oh, please go ahead.
no, I was
Sorry.
just saying the fact that we're thinking about it and we're implementing technology that is tethered to the idea that we do want to know where something started. We do want to know if something is real. That's powerful. And just as we talk about AI and machine learning in general and all that will come into society from it, we should be having those conversations.
Hmm. Yes. And I think this is a good example here on the screen in which you turn the image to black and white. That can have already by itself just a lot of an effect on how an image is perceived. And so what I love about this technology is that it solidifies, your name to the image, but also allows you to record any changes that you may make in the future to that image as well. It's just a way to document the process, so to speak, so that people understand, all right, this image wasn't originally a black and white image. It was shot in 2024, for example. And I think that's important, just from a documenting standpoint and solidifying that information in today's age, at least for you as the artist to know for sure that this information is real, that is critical. A lot of people in the,
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
please
Nathan.
go ahead.
I was just saying,
No,
like in the
please.
digital age, that's important, right? Like I think the description, one of the descriptions for it is like that digital negative. So it's important that we have something that can represent what a negative could have represented, so many years ago when there was no, digital photography, or at least it wasn't the standard. Now we're in
Right.
an age where an image can move across the planet, 100 times in the span of a few seconds.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. As we look at your black and white images, I'm seeing some questions from the chat regarding your processing. Do you mind sharing a little more about how you process these images, both the color images and the black and white images?
Yeah, I mean, so these images, especially the one that we have up right now, this is all in camera outside of the black and white conversion. But the motion and everything is all in camera, so nothing post on to create the look. And for something like this, it was important to capture what did the moment feel like, right? That's the big, for me, that was
Mm,
stand on with this camera, is being invested in trying to capture the feeling of a moment. Um, Pulling away from trying to take these just technically perfect photos, um, but really diving into emotionally perfect photos. And
mm,
by emotionally perfect, meaning that that we were able to dive into the emotion of the image and what did that moment in time feel like for me as the person holding the camera, and doing my best to translate that through a photo that you could then absorb as a viewer. Um,
mm.
Me, the process, I'm lucky to have friends like Jason Roman who are just maestros when it comes to color and obviously manipulating color and color grading. That's still very present when you're doing black and white work, right? And trying to
Yep.
maximize tonality that you're getting out of your black and whites. And so for me, it was just trying to look at where do I preserve a lot of the most amount of detail while also creating a lot of shape and depth to the image. I like contrastier photos. It's my particular preference for especially black and white, but I love contrast. I love shape. I love the way light moves through an image. I think light, is obviously it's a critical component to photography. And I think that just getting things well lit is just the beginning. So from there, it's like, okay, something's well lit. Now where can I take it? Or where can I take it further? Where can the light really become an active participant in the story, like become a really active character, like a main character in the story, if you will? And that's where I go. I approach photography from sort of a graphical standpoint. I was a graffiti writer when I was a kid. That led me into like ultimately into graphic design. And prior to being a photographer, that was my primary artistic medium, was graphic design. And so I came into photography with these principles in mind about balance. So for me, when I'm
Mm,
looking at light in an image, it's more than just making sure that the subject is well lit, but I want to see like how does light become, an actual subject inside the image as well. And in love with the work of Van Ho, and just like these people who really use light as like a graphical element of the image, and that to the point where the light again became a character inside the frame.
Yes, absolutely. We were getting a lot of questions. Of course, we know what camera you were using, but what were the lenses that you were using? And a follow-up question to that is, what is your workhorse, no pun intended, lens for similar projects?
So I'm a big 50 prime shooter. Yeah, I love the focal length. I shoot with an M3 almost every day, and so I have a 50 cron on that, dual range 50 millimeter. For this project, yes, the 50 was in, the 50 Lux was a workhorse, no pun intended. And the 35 Lux was also a lens that came into play here. And believe it or not, because everybody who knows me knows like I'm, 35 is about as wide as I get, but a 28 Emerald was also used in this project, and that was the sort of the trinity, I think, for me were those three lenses. I didn't shoot any longer than that. I've traditionally shoot longer. I love a great 90 millimeter lens, and years ago, a 135 was like a lens I would walk out into the street with like every day. So I love
Yeah.
longer lenses. So to say that the longest focal length I worked with on this project was a 50 is a big statement. But the just sort of the power of moving into lenses that you don't ordinarily use, it opens up an entirely different channel of storytelling for you, and you have to really start to think. And when we're thinking, I think when we're thinking about creating, we're able to move into a space where intuitive creation can take all types of forms. I would not have intuitively picked up a 28, but I wanted to make sure, because we're going to be in this like amazing location that we were in, and I knew how vast and how beautiful it was going to be. I wanted to make sure to be able to capture that completely.
What that says for me is that, with a lens where your max telephoto reach is 50 millimeter, and you said that you use, 35 and 28. For me, I think for how delicate and sensitive and intentional this project is, it makes me think that you wanted to get closer to your subjects. You're not trying to get farther away from your subjects. You're being in their presence, and I think that that itself is a testament to the project, the lenses that you're using.
No, absolutely. Like getting closer was a thing for me. Again, like I said, I was very comfortable with a 135 and a 90 millimeter for a long time, 85, for a long time. And a really good friend of mine, Jamira, had told me, you got to get closer. And that was a big challenge for me.
Yeah.
I remember responding to her saying like, I am close. Like, look, you can see all the details. Like she's like, but I can see what focal length you're shooting on. I can see that the scene is undisturbed. Like, try to get close.
Mm.
And that changed my life. That challenge, that advice. And for me, that was powerful, because as I've gone off, I've done a lot of street portraiture work, getting closer to people and building those relationships with people that were larger than taking their photo, but creating a life moment with the person. Even if I never saw them,
Hmm.
like we were now intrinsically connected for our lives, because there was that moment that happened. We impacted each other, and whenever we come across other human beings, right, we're changed. Maybe the change is small, or maybe it's huge, but people impact us. And so getting closer, and to a using focal lengths where I'm not going to just be able to snag a shot, but I have to get close and talk to people and be noticed by people, was a
Hmm.
big thing for my photography, and it changed a lot for me. And I think that's also the power in challenging, being amongst friends, family, and colleagues that will challenge you, and push you further than where you would naturally push yourself, is huge. That's a huge part of the
Yep.
growth. Same thing with your mentors. Your mentors should be pushing you way outside these comfort zones so that you can grow and find things about yourself that you did not even know existed.
Absolutely. And I want to take the time to transition over from your project to more of your street photography and your portraiture with some other people here. What was your experience shooting with this camera on the streets? I'm guessing it was a very different kind of environment and experience than working on this project.
Yeah, it handled well on the streets. I mean, and I just from when I had had the camera in my hands, it went with me to New York. I've obviously shot a bunch with it here in Oakland. I would be in LA. It even made it across to Curacao, and photographing people in Curacao, on the island there. And it was wonderful. Like it's such a minimalistic design, and it's such a
Hmm.
small camera that you get to interact with people in a really special way. And I think that that's important. I've always wanted to, it's when I was a younger photographer, I wanted a bigger and bigger camera so that I could be a legitimate photographer, right? Like,
Sure.
I need something big. I need the big lenses. I need a hand grip. And, at times that's called for. But as I've gotten older and I've spent more time with photography, I want my cameras to get smaller and smaller and smaller, because my objective is for the camera to not exist, and for the only thing to exist is the moment with me and that person, or me in that scene, and for me to capture that. And I would get people asking for advice about building a relationship with someone on the street to the point where you could photograph them and get like a really natural, authentic version of that person. And I would say, try not to go out, if you have the option, try not to go out with the biggest camera you have, right? Because when we interact with strangers or people out in the world, especially if you're in a city, there is a wall that is naturally between you and that person. And the things you say, the things you do, the way that you present, the amount of kindness you can offer to that moment, the amount of truthfulness you can offer to that moment, those are the things that start to like take the wall down. But it's a brick wall, so you're going brick by brick. You don't want to add a bigger brick with the camera. And I think the smaller the
Sure.
camera, like the smaller that wall is, it's just the natural way that we sort of see things. And I think for a big extent, or to a large extent, we still consider like bigger cameras professional. And so when we see a large camera, people want to know more about, okay, well, who do you work for, and where is it going, and what is this for? And when you have a smaller
Right.
camera, those questions just come up less. So this camera, being as small as it is, being as unassuming as it is, as minimal as it is, as far as the branding and the cut, like it really becomes, it really gets put off to the side, and you get to build those relationships out in the world, with the people you're photographing, or even in just the scene. Like there's something about reducing the camera that allows an expansion in the image
Hmm.
process.
We were talking about the process of shooting with this camera and about slowing down. I have another question from the chat, which is, how many images did you shoot overall compared to the images that you kept? And I'm wondering if you had more keepers with this camera because of the process of slowing down.
Yeah, I don't have like the metrics on that, as far as the actual numbers. I would say that if I normally keep about 20 to 30% of my images from a
Hmm.
shoot, or at least I find usefulness in 20 or 30% of those images. And that doesn't mean they were bad, but just like maybe if I'm shooting, and I'm being a little bit more liberal with the shots, maybe maybe those shots, that cluster of shots, there's nothing um very different between 4 or 5 shots in a row. And so I would keep one, right? Well, with this camera, it was much more of this of a pacing that I would have taken with a film camera. It was a little bit faster than film. It would depend.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'm in the moment and I'll blast through an expensive roll of film and regret it later. But and that's only because of the price. The process is great, but the price of film is high. So this yielded more. This yielded more. I would say anywhere from 50 to 60% of the images were ones that I found useful, versus again like maybe 20 to 30 or 20 to 35% on a different system. And that is a lot of, one, not taking as many pictures, and two, just kind of being a little bit more focused, as I am taking those pictures. There's a learning curve, right? Not having that immediate feedback on exposure or framing is
Right.
going to be a learning curve. But once you get past that, then it's just, yeah, it's not a thing. And I think again, you are just a little bit more focused in, and you're able to walk away from a scene a little bit easier too, right? It's a strange relationship, because you are dialed in more, you are hyper focused, but at the same time, you take an image and you kind of just go. And it's the same thing with film, right? If you take a photo on film, maybe you take one more, but you pretty much just kind of take it and you go, and you don't know anything about it till later.
Right. I have a quote from someone in the chat who, this person is asking what you think of this statement. The statement is, the brain sees all, the camera captures segments of what the brain can see.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a statement like that. You know, there are so many things that the brain is taking in and interpreting, and it's deeper. Yeah, you know, there's so many things that we correlate with just being visual that are not. Like the way that we
Right.
see is a reflection of everything we're experiencing. You know, if you think about this idea that every photo we take is a self portrait, everything about what's happening from our eye to the lens has something to do with who we are and how we see the world. And so I think the brain is perceiving a lot of things all at once when we're out in the world, and especially as we're photographing things. And so I think that the camera is going to capture some of that. And I think the more open you are to yourself, and the more connected you are to the process, and not so much the output, the closer you're going to get to that ratio being a little bit different, where you are capturing more of what the brain is seeing.
We're going to show a couple more images here. A lot of questions regarding your editing, including what software do you use to edit these images?
I use a couple different bits of software. I've used Adobe since I was a kid. My dad used to bring home Adobe software to do image editing with from his early days in IT. And so I've always used Adobe. When I did my graphic design work, I used it. It was just like it became a very like native language to me across their different bits of software. But now I use Capture One a great deal. I still do use Adobe Lightroom for things that are quick, but for things where I need to have more control over color, I have found that process has been easier for me with Capture One. I know some really talented colleagues and friends who are wizards with Lightroom, but again, there we keep joking around that Jason Roman needs to open up a color house or color school, but he swears by it. And I think also, depending on the jobs that you're getting, you're going to be asked to do those jobs in Capture One, because the sharing process and the collaborative process of big projects usually relies on you using Capture One. And I mean, my first time using it was getting a request for some work I was doing with the Warriors, and the brand that was putting the project together, like the day before, they're like, "Oh, we need you to do it in Capture. We need all the edits in Capture One, and here's the." So I had to like have a crash course in Capture One.
Right.
But yeah, so a lot of it's in Capture One, but I use little bits of different software. Primarily it's a jump between Lightroom and Capture One.
I have a question from Greg Hen. Good to see you, Greg. Was there a moment that you knew wholeheartedly that you nailed the shot and realized you couldn't see it? And how was that anticipation adding to the experience? Or the opposite, maybe you hope intensely that you got the shot and you had to wait and see. He says it sounds like an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, there were plenty of those moments. I would say there were less moments that I knew I nailed the shot, and more moments where I knew I nailed the moment. The shot was
Mm,
determined, because you don't know what you have until you look at it. And
right.
so there were plenty of moments where I didn't know if I nailed it. And that was actually, for the sake of this, was great, because I could move on. Versus sometimes with my M11, which was a life-changing camera for me. That was my first rangefinder. Or I'm sorry, my first Leica rangefinder, my first M series camera. It changed a lot for me. Prior to that, I was shooting with an X Pro 3 a lot, because I was trying to get into this groove of spending more time away from the screen, spending more time looking through the optics of the camera and crafting my frames there. And I love my X Pro 3. I still have it. It was a great transition for me to like be more intentional with the camera. And then the M11 for me was the next level from that, because now I'm manually focusing everything. Like everything about what's happening is a result of a decision that I'm making. And then from there, to go from the M11 to using this camera, it was having to feel okay with not looking at everything and knowing that everything was perfect,
Right.
but being confident and comfortable in my skill set to know that I've used a lot of rangefinders at this point. You know, by the time the M11-D had come into my hands, I had used a lot of different rangefinders. I gotten very comfortable, right, with my process with the rangefinder. And so there was this need to just lean into that because I had no other choice.
Mm,
You know, there was no other choice.
right. Yeah, I feel like sometimes, at least for me, the excitement of a potential shot or I got the shot clouds my judgment in continuing on my walk if I'm doing street photography. I say like, well, at least I have that one shot that I took, 2 blocks away that I know is perfect. Which of course, when you look on the big screen, maybe it's not, and there's a little bit of disappointment there. But I like what you said about the M11-D, where you have to move on. You don't know until you put it on your computer or your phone, and there's something really nice about leaving that space, as you said at the beginning of our conversation, to continue to create instead of reminiscing on the excitement that you just had about that one shot. I guess you have the exact same feeling with film photography as well.
100%. And it's that moving on process is like, it becomes really beautiful because there's a sense of there's a high risk and there's a high reward. And I mean, that is ultimately what we're looking to do, is like have that deep sense of I have the moment, uh,
Hmm.
and I have to move on from it and move on. Like while you're spending time trying to take that shot 5 other times, you're maybe missing the other moment. There's maybe something else
Hmm.
happening that you're missing. Oh, let's see. I
Yep.
lose camera signal. Let's see if we can bring that back.
While we wait for you to get that video back up, I'll show another image and Brandon's final image of this presentation here. And what struck me about this particular image right here is just the colors, the vibrancy of those natural colors of the yellows and the greens on that white and gray backgrounds, but also the textures, right? You're having some depth into that image. You have the sidewalk, you have the newspaper as well, and it really adds to the intensity and the emotion of the shot here. If you're able to see the shot, do you mind sharing a little bit more about how you got this shot and what attracted you to it?
Let me check in 1 second here. I was just trying to see what the technical difficulties were here with the camera.
And we'll cycle around some more shots as we wait, going back to some of the work we saw already. And folks, if you have more questions for Brandon, please let us know. I'll be answering a couple of questions here in the chat from a technical standpoint. One of the questions was the speed at which you're able to transfer images to your mobile device or to your computer. The USB-C supports up to 100 megabytes per second in transferring the data. You can also pull out the SD card from the camera and import it directly to your camera that way as well. Happy to answer any other technical questions as they come in.
You know, Nathan, I'm not sure what happened.
No worries, we can still hear you. So if you're welcome to share more about the shot that you see on the screen here. I'd love to hear how you got this shot.
Perfect. So yeah, this shot is walking around with my some good friends. We have a club here, the Oakland Street Photography Club, and we try to get together and be intentional about photography. We do a monthly event called Cameras and Coffee, and so it's all stemmed from moments like this where we get, we go out, we get some coffee, we walk around Oakland. This shot was basically taken downtown Oakland in the Chinatown area, and there, if you go there on a specific day, there's markets that are going on and people out selling a lot of produce, sometimes even just selling all types of things, but produce is a huge one there. And I saw this moment, and This is with a 28 millimeter. So I was
Hmm.
bound to a 28 millimeter for the month. It was a challenge that my friends and I had. But I saw this moment and the colors were perfect. The lighting was perfect. I loved seeing the text coming off the newspaper there. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you see it and you know it's right. Uh,
Yeah.
it's talking to you in all the ways that you want to be talked to. And I think it's important, you know, that you listen to that voice, because I remember a time where I was mainly posting and sort of like exhibiting portrait work. And I
Hmm.
would feel like, okay, well, where is this going to go? This was a long time ago, but it was still, I'll never forget how I felt about this period of time. There were photos I was saying no to in my mind that I wouldn't take because I didn't know where they would go or where they would exist, or it felt counter to who I was. Like, okay, well, I'm not that kind of photographer. And when things got much better for me mentally with photography, and I think photography got healthier for me, was when I decided that if my mind told me to stop and look at something, if something pulled me into it, I didn't need any other answers in that moment than that,
Mm.
and that I could figure out the rest later. But it was important to capture the image, and
Yeah.
I have been that way ever since. And it's allowed me to capture things that I ordinarily wouldn't capture. It's allowed me to alleviate that burden, right, of having
Mm.
to know the totality of an image's lifespan or its direction before taking it. It's a heavy thing to carry. And I think as we're in this age of like social media and immediate, being able to have an immediate response to your work, we get dangerously engrossed in this idea of like, what is the purpose of a thing? What is it? What is this image going to do? What should it do? What does it mean?
Right.
Which I think is fine for content. If you're creating content, you're doing marketing strategies, or you're trying to like create a brand and you're creating the visual identity of a brand, and everything has to be really strategic and planned out. Fine. But I think
Yeah.
photography can be very dangerously mixed into that, and you start to believe that you need to support your brand when in fact you need to be supporting your soul. You know, you need
Mm.
supporting the things that are happening internally with you that are even making you grab the camera and capture life in the first place. And the
Right.
further I got away from that, the unhappier I was with photography, and the closer I got to surrendering to to my brain and to my heart and to my soul, the things that I maybe couldn't articulate that drew me to a scene, the better things got for me.
And we're all visual people, and there is something that attracts us to a scene. It's totally a natural phenomenon, and kind of letting go of like, okay, what's the goal of this image, like you've been describing. I think it also offers an opportunity for you to look inside and say, what is it that I'm attracted about this scene? Is it the colors? Is it the texture? Is it the light? And I feel like that helps you, that process of thinking about why you're attracted to a certain situation or to a certain lighting situation or texture. It allows you to hone in on your craft and really lock on to your signature look. Everybody has a look and feel to your images, and I totally see the signature of Brandon Ruffin through these images. But that only happens, in my opinion, through the process of looking inside of why am I attracted to this situation? Is that something that you felt as well?
Absolutely. I mean, if you one of my biggest regrets is times I spent looking at other people's work and trying to replicate that. I mean, that there is a point where any artist is doing that. It's the natural part of being an artist. You have to look at things and understand the art form and study it. And you're naturally going to be influenced by those things. And you're going to have to actually copy those things as you are learning how to do a thing. But again, if we go back to the era we're in with social media, where you're able to get like that immediate sort of response, it's not real though, right? There are incredible photos somewhere sitting with 5 likes on them, and mediocre or soulless photos sitting there with maybe 100,000 likes on them. This is
Mm.
not to value anybody's work, but what I mean is there is somewhere an incredible photo going unnoticed, and that person may feel like that photo wasn't very good because it didn't get the 20,000 likes that another photo got, and maybe they stopped taking photos like this amazing one so they could take photos more like the one that got likes that they thought, right? Like
Yep.
these cycles can be really vicious, especially in the mind of an artist, because we are emotionally sensitive people.
Hmm.
You have to be. You have to be that way to create art. And so we are susceptible to ourselves emotionally, and we are very perceptive about what's happening in the world, or at least how we see it. And that can change people. And I hate to think of some of the amazing art we've missed out on because somebody was trying to beat the algorithm, or somebody was, trying to make it as an artist, and make a living as an artist if they could just get, 10,000 followers or 50,000 followers or 100,000 followers, right? Like all these
Sure.
markers that we set on ourselves that are not real. Um, I hate to think of some of the work that we've missed out on because of it. And so, you know, there has to be this connection with the self that's really pure and confident. And these are probably not the best ways. These are maybe not the ways people would describe artists all the time, like the confidence aspect. I think most artists are their own worst critics. Um, but if you can make it through that, if you can fight off the voices that are happening inside your head that you're not good enough, that you shouldn't be here, you're not worthy, your work's not good enough, so and so's better. If you can fight that off and you can sustain and you can create through that, you're gonna create things that only you can create, and
Hmm.
that you start to get your visual identity. I would say your artistic identity, but when it comes to photography, your visual identity, and the way that somebody can know a photo is yours, regardless of the subject matter, is when
Right.
now they can see you, and that's because you've spent
Yep.
the time, the brutal time, with yourself, and you've made that possible. And not everyone's going to go through that process because not everyone's going to be open to it. They're constantly chasing after a look, chasing after a number, chasing after all the things that the world tells us to chase. It could be detrimental to actually establishing your own identity as an artist. And it's something I had to go through. And I'm happy where I'm at now, where I do feel like I have a visual identity, but it was a brutal process to get there, for sure.
Takes time and effort. Yeah, like anything, like any craft.
Absolutely.
Brandon, I want to thank you so much for your time, for your passion, for your energy, and thank you as well for your team with this amazing project that you created. Folks, you can see the full video again on YouTube. There's also Brandon Ruffin's storyteller page online on Leica Camera's website. I invite you to see that as well. If you want to learn more about Brandon, here is his website on the slide, as well as a way for you to follow him on Instagram. You can also follow us at Leica Camera USA as well as Leica Academy USA, and there is a QR code on the right-hand side to learn more about our Academy endeavors, which include classes and workshops for you to learn more about your craft. Brandon, before I let you go, would you mind sharing with everyone what is next for you and what can people anticipate from you in the coming weeks and months?
Absolutely. More photography, more
Always.
photography. Um, that is always something I'm working on. So I currently just finished a book, um, and that, much to the help of many friends who've been there to sort of help guide me through that journey. That is a journey. That is really putting your love and your time and your heart into an idea for a book is hard. It's very, very hard. I found it was even harder than like editing for films, um,
Mm,
which is a hard process, right? But like killing off the things that you love and that you've taken your time to make because they don't
yep.
necessarily add to the story you're telling in this one particular way is a hard thing. So that has been a project that I'm glad is complete. It's still looking for a home, but it's that part is complete, and that's been much to the help of Demondre Ward, Kieran Kranani, Alex Ramos. Like those are three prominent people that helped me in a way that I could not help myself in editing and trying to figure out like how I was really trying to tell this story. Um, More film projects. Xavier and I are currently working on two other projects that I think will be really beautiful. Um, we'll be working with Dale for another project, because this project that we did together brought a lot of great people together. The crew of people who came to make this happen were absolutely incredible, and I just couldn't have been done without them. I think film is one of those things where it creates these really beautiful things that can be shared across a lot of different platforms, and people can digest it. They can take away what they want from it, but you can't do it by yourself. Technically you could do a film by yourself, but I don't know if you can make a good one by yourself. And so the beautiful part about film as a medium is that it is a great representation about how a functioning society should work, right? Because you have all these different
Mm,
people filling different roles, having different priorities in a sense. And all of those things none of them come before the largest priority, which is to create a really beautiful film that we can all walk away from and be proud of. Even when our
mhm,
even when our own roles are sort of like conflict, or our own needs conflict on set, that we can all come together and create something that is, for the sake of creating something that's beautiful and meaningful and represents us. And that's the way our society should be. We should be able to come together and do that quite often. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten there yet, but we should be able to look at the larger goal of what is it we want as a society, what is it we want as human beings on this earth right now, and we should be dropping whatever our own issues or where we conflict for the greater good of that, and providing something better for another generation, for our kids and for their kids and their kids after that. And so I think I love film for that fact that it forces you to be collaborative. It forces you to share ideas. It forces you to take in ideas, and you have to always look at the greater good, which is, at the end, we want something really beautiful. So that I couldn't have done it without the crew. They are amazing, forever in debt to everyone who showed up to help make that happen. To include Sunny and Denver, which are the horses that were on set. We couldn't have done any of it without their
of course.
cooperation. They were incredible. Dale and his father have done an incredible job with those horses. So yeah, I mean, it was great.
Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us today again. And Brandon, thank you so much for talking with us. And we're looking forward to talk to you again soon on another podcast, should we have the opportunity.